So let's start by looking at this image. This is one of the closing images from the film Casablanca, which you may or may not have seen. It's a fairly iconic image. If I were to ask you to respond to it, in all likelihood you would do a decent job of picking it apart. But there's a very simple tool that will enable you to break it into its pieces, to see those relationships, and so on. All right, so what we're talking about then is quadrants. Quadrants is a very simple tool. It's not universal. Not every filmmaker uses them, and not every filmmaker who uses them all the time. But they can be applied to still shots, scenes, as well as the paintings. So it's pretty widespread in how it can be used. Quick note, cinematography, in case you are not familiar with what that actually means, it has to do with the construction of the image. What's where and why? What is the relationship between the objects, the lines that we see on the screen? So basically what quadrants do, we break it up into several parts to create multiple mini-stories, but also essentially chapters. Now we don't realize we're reading it in this direction, but we do. And this establishment of essentially chapters can create relationships of power, relationships of closeness or distance, etc. So if we come back to this image, if we break it into pieces, first outlined down vertically, suddenly we see there's two chapters. There's a story of him, and he's clearly the most important. Now he's on the right, and typically we're going to read from left to right, but again, faster than we realize we're doing. But he's taking up half the screen. We have him, and on the other side, we have them. Separation. Top and bottom, him, them. We get the same story no matter how we break up the screen. And if we break it up then into these quadrants, you'll notice we have very distinct points. Now, when we read an image, if you'll recall, we move from upper left to lower right. So if we start up here, what's filling the upper left? Nothing. Emptiness. What is this image about? Distance, separation, emptiness. That's the primary thing we're supposed to take away. Then we see him taking up so much of the screen, and yet there's this huge distance from him down to them. So even though he's on the right side, which could be typically sort of the last part we're supposed to look, because he's responding. He's not the actor in the scene. He is the responder. They are the ones taking action by moving away from him. So he's seeing them go, but it's clearly his perspective we're seeing as they move down here into the bottom. So there's just a quick example. Now, did this filmmaker intentionally break this into quadrants? Possible to say. But it's there. And again, we aren't going to see this all the time, but it can be very, very effective, a very quick tool for taking an image that you're not sure how to take it apart and to start. We can look at it in terms of simple relationships between characters. Here we see two people broken by a great amount of distance, occupying essentially the same plane, but by putting in the quadrant squares, we can see that she is a slightly lower than he is, slightly smaller, etc. It just stands out in greater relief. All right, so we can use this in a couple of different ways. First off, for effect. By juxtaposing characters and their situations, this can create tension or humor, etc. If you look at this image from Grand Budapest Hotel, and we break it into its halves in either direction, we can sort of analyze, so what's humorous about this image? Well, if we look at them, they are coward and fretful and stressed on one half. On the other half, bored, going about their daily routine. Top, same contrast. So when we put it together, we get the humor of the people stressed out and cowering, and the person right next to them doing something wildly different. All right, with something like this, where there's an enormous amount happening at the same time, we can get a similar thing when we break it up and we kind of see somebody as the observer. Now, of course, in this scene, this character is in motion, but they're going to pass through the entire top part of this screen, and we can see up here the person and just carnage, and in the bottom half, vehicles, right? There's just movement. And it helps kind of create an image with some structure where there wasn't before. So the top half is about the character, the bottom half is about the action. All right, conflicting realities. And what do I mean by that? Again, for humorous effect, kind of like juxtaposing characters. In this image, if you'll notice, we've got two people sitting at a table speaking in the top half. In the bottom half, if you can see just barely, each of them have got a gun pointing at the other with their napkin. So we've got this above the board conversation and below what's really going on, and each one occupies its own quadrant. Changes in status. Now, this isn't going to happen in a still shot, but if you look at the following two images from the film Birdman. So this is a character who is literally being haunted by a character he used to play in a series of blockbuster films. And this character follows him around, taunting him that he should return to Hollywood blockbusters and so on. So in this point, the character is following him and mocking him, but he's not really listening. Gradually, though, he begins falling into this sort of being seduced by the ideas that this character is giving him. And the character is going to move from the right side of the screen, which is a slightly less powerful position, to the upper left, most dominant and higher position. So this transition can show shifts in power. Finally, emphasizing a character's isolation. If we look at this, again, it seems like a fairly straightforward shot, but just applying the lines can really draw out some of the interesting things about that's happening. Look at the contrast between the light and dark on the left side and the right side. Look how on the left side we have not just the light, but also nature. Now it's fake. It's dried flowers. It's pictures of nature. But now look at the right side. Nothing. Everything is angles. Everything is solid and broken up into sort of geometric shapes. The left side is much more fluid. Even the lamps have more lines and color and curves. And then we have this character who, for all intents and purposes, though he takes up an enormous amount of space, is broken into one part of the screen. Other times it can be even more clear, right? We can see how deliberately an image has been used to create a perfect sense of symmetry. If you look at this one from A Clockwork Orange, is there any question that this director knew what he was doing? If you look at how the split down the center of the central character's face, he becomes two distinctly different people. And again, there's no question who is the most powerful person in this image. So essentially, quadrants can be a very effective tool for just accessing an image, looking at what's where and why. And again, they're not always there all the time, but next time you're looking at a piece and you're not sure where to begin, whether it's film, still shots, or paintings, start with quadrants, see what emerges.